I swear to you, if there's a graveyard for the internet, it's exactly where I spent the last 15 years of my life. And I was the grave digger, the groundskeeper, and the only regular visitor. My name is Ethan, and I was the curator. Not of priceless paintings or marble statues. I curated digital memories. I took care of the forgotten archive. You have to understand something. Today's internet is made of foam. Fast, loud, weightless. The internet I guarded, the one I preserved, was made of lead. Heavy, slow, full of history. It was a place where we collected what the world had thrown away. 2005 profile photos with sepia filters, poems that only ever existed on late-night forums. The first time someone used a strange emoji and immediately regretted it. I was the keeper of those ghosts, the one who kept the light on, just in case someone, someday, remembered they had existed. My office smelled like dust and old electronics. It was in the basement of a building no one visited anymore. I had 3 CRT monitors, the bulky kind that looked like ancient televisions, and the constant groan of an air conditioner struggling to keep decade-old servers alive. I spent most of my time alone. My only real company was the steady rhythm of the cooling fan in my main server, which I'd affectionately named Methuselah. Methuselah stored over 2 million fragments of lives that no longer mattered to anyone else, but meant everything to me. The problem is, ghosts don't pay bills. The news arrived a month ago, cold and bureaucratic as usual. Funding had been cut. They said the archive was obsolete, that it didn't generate engagement, and that the space would be better used for a new artificial intelligence project that would, according to them, focus on the future. The future? I was looking at the past. And to them, the past was garbage. I was given 1 month to back up whatever I could. But the truth is, you can't back up a feeling. You can't save the sensation of loading a web page that takes 10 seconds to appear, and realizing that the waiting itself was part of the experience. Today was the last day. I had to write the final post. The closing post. The last note. The digital headstone. I'd been working on the text for weeks, rewriting it at least 30 times, trying to find the right words to say goodbye to something that was more than a job. It was my identity. I turned on the dim desk lamp. My keyboard, a loud mechanical one I loved, was covered in a thin layer of dust I didn't bother cleaning. I powered up Methuselah. The sound of the old operating system booting felt like an organ playing in an empty church. I opened the archive's interface. It was simple, almost primitive. No pop-ups. No autoplay videos. Just a white screen, waiting. The final post couldn't be generic. I couldn't just write closed. It had to capture the essence of what we preserved. It had to represent the beauty of human connection, even when it traveled through a screeching dial-up modem. I decided the post would be a tribute to a single image. I called it the Blue Bottle Photo. Let me explain. The image had been submitted to the archive about 15 years earlier, anonymously. No metadata. No description. Nothing. Just a low-resolution photo taken with an early phone camera. A glass soda bottle, the old kind, almost completely buried in beach sand. Only the neck of the bottle was visible, the blue glass catching sunlight in a way that made it look like the bottle was smiling. It wasn't art. It was trash on a beach. And yet, somehow, that image became the heart of the archive. Visitors, few, but deeply devoted, started creating stories around it. They said it held a message that would never be read. That it was the last trace of a summer love that faded away. It became a symbol of our mission, finding meaning and beauty in what had been forgotten and discarded. I opened the image file. The blue glow filled my old monitor, and I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, the feeling I always got when looking at something beautiful that was about to disappear. I started typing the final text. My hands were steady. My heart was in my throat. Friends of the Forgotten Archive. I began. The tone had to be formal, but warm. I wrote about the importance of memory. About how the smallest things are the ones that truly define us. I wrote about the blue bottle, and how it taught us that even when we're nearly buried under the sand of time, we can still reflect light. I typed for nearly 2 hours. I was meticulous. I told the story of how the archive began. with a group of idealists trying to save personal blogs before social media swallowed everything. I wrote about the first major donation we ever received, an entire server filled with abandoned GeoCities files no one wanted anymore. The post grew long, and I didn't care about character limits. I needed to pour everything out. I needed proof that we had existed. When I reached the final paragraph, I stopped. Took a deep breath. The glow of the monitor reflected in my glasses. I was crying, quietly, the kind of crying you do when you're used to being alone. And so, I typed, with the blue bottle as our silent witness, we bring our work to an end. We thank everyone who ever visited us. Remember this, what was digital was once real. And what was real deserves to be remembered. I read it one last time. It was perfect. Sad, but honest. Uploading to the forgotten archive was slow, like everything else about it. I attached the image file, then copied and pasted the text into the description field. I set the publication date to the exact moment I would press the button. My hand hovered over the mouse. The button read, Publish and Archive Permanently. It would be the final command I ever gave Methuselah. After that, I would shut everything down, unplug the power cables, and take the hard drives to secure storage, where they would sit forever, waiting for a resurrection I knew would never come. I was about to click. My index finger was already applying pressure. The screen didn't move. The basement was almost completely silent, broken only by the endless zzzzzzz of the air conditioner. The system began to process. A pixelated green progress bar crawled forward. 5%. I closed my eyes. It was done. The forgotten archive had spoken for the last time. I opened my eyes again, ready to start the shutdown sequence. I was already rehearsing the commands I'd need to type into the terminal. That's when it happened. Methuselah, running in deep hibernation mode, made a sound I hadn't heard in years. A sharp, short ding, the kind that meant a notification. I stared at the bottom right corner of the screen, where the live interaction counter sat. It had been stuck at 0 for more than 3 years. The last interaction had been a spam bot trying to sell cryptocurrency. Now it displayed a number. 1 new interaction. I frowned. That was impossible. The archive was so obscure even the most aggressive crawler bots couldn't find it anymore. I clicked the interaction link. The system, slow as ever, loaded a new page, the comment thread on the post I just published. The final post. And there it was. A comment. Posted less than 30 seconds after I'd clicked publish. I leaned closer. The blue glow lit my face, and a chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. The comment had no username. The field contained only 3 dots. And the message was short. 1 sentence. The message is in the cork, Ethan. Not the glass. I froze. My blood went cold. I couldn't breathe. The message in the cork. No one, absolutely no one, knew about the cork. I'd spent 15 years cataloging the forgotten archive. I knew every line of code, every bug, every background story. The official narrative of the blue bottle was that it was empty, just a beautiful piece of trash. But Ethan, the curator, I had a secret. When I first cataloged the original photo, I'd used advanced image processing software, for its time, to try to restore the low resolution. In the enlarged version, I noticed something tiny, almost invisible. The bottle wasn't open. It was sealed. And there was a sliver of dark cork, barely perceptible, jammed into the neck. I never told anyone. I convinced myself it was a pixel artifact. Or if it was real, it was a detail only I needed to know, so the story could stay poetic. The beauty of the blue bottle was the mystery. If I told people there was a cork, they'd demand to know what was inside, and it would ruin the whole spell. I never recorded that observation anywhere. It wasn't in the database. It existed only in my memory. And now someone, using an IP address that looked like it came through an ultra-secure proxy, was telling me the message was in the cork. I leaned back, the old office chair creaking under me. Who was this? How did they know my name? How did they know about the cork, something that existed only in my head and on my calibrated monitor? I was alone in the basement. Methuselah was a closed system, cut off from the public internet hours ago, except for that final upload. By instinct, I tried to trace the IP. I opened the terminal and started typing, hands trembling slightly. The ping failed. The address was a digital dead end. I looked back at the comment. The message is in the cork, Ethan. Not the glass. I glanced at the clock on the screen. 3 minutes until the scheduled permanent shutdown. I had to decide. I could ignore it, delete the comment, shut everything down, follow the plan and close the digital cemetery. It would be the end. But the blue bottle had always been about searching for the message, even when it was buried. And I was the only person who knew there was a cork. Ethan, the curator, had one last mystery to solve. I closed the shutdown terminal. The plan was suspended. I needed more information. I needed to know who was behind that proxy, who had broken years of silence, and why they were speaking to me at the exact moment I was about to kill the archive. I typed a reply in the comment field, ignoring every rule I had about security and anonymity. Who are you? I clicked send. The system churned, and my message appeared beneath the first. I waited. Methuselah went quiet again. A minute passed. Nothing. I started to feel foolish. Maybe it was a hacker playing games. Someone who'd been inside the system for years, waiting for a dramatic moment to reveal themselves. I was about to stand up and shut the server down manually, ready to accept that the message in the cork was only a cruel coincidence. Then the ding came again, softer this time, almost a whisper. One new interaction. I snapped my eyes back to the screen. The had replied. The new message was longer. I am the message, Ethan. And you can't archive me. You have to dig me up. I rubbed my eyes. The phrasing was wrong, like it was describing itself as an object. What do you want? I typed fast. Any pretense of formality was gone now. I was talking to a ghost. The reply came almost instantly. The proxy was active, but the communication was too quick, like the sender had been waiting years for this exact conversation. I want the archive, Ethan. Or rather, I want what the archive hid from me. You have the blue bottle. You have the key. I need you to show me what's in the cork before they arrive. The word they hit me like ice. I'd never worried about they. The forgotten archive was so harmless its only enemy was indifference. I typed, who are they? I'm shutting the archive down in less than 2 minutes. I don't know what you're talking about. The next answer was the one that made me push back from the desk and start pacing my tiny office. They're the ones who turn lead into foam, Ethan. And you know the blue bottle isn't the only real thing you saved. Remember Protocol C. Protocol C. That term belonged to a locked room in my mind. Only me, the original founder of the archive, dead 10 years, and a handful of idealists had ever known it. It was our internal code name, secret, used for our most ambitious and most dangerous mission, cataloging the internet's inconvenient truths. The facts scrubbed by corporations and governments in the earliest days of the net, before control became total. Protocol C was our vault, and it had been sealed for years inside an encrypted subdirectory on Methuselah. No outsider was supposed to know it existed. I sat back down, staring at the screen, mouth dry. You're one of us, I whispered to the monitor, even though I knew it couldn't hear me. I typed, prove it. What was Protocol C's motto? I clicked send. Time was running out. I could hear the system's internal countdown warning me that shutdown was imminent. The ding came. The reply. Silence weighs more than noise. Now let's work. You need to post the blue bottle again. But this time, you'll post the cork. That was the motto. The secret motto. Whoever was on the other side wasn't joking. They had been there from the beginning. They knew the forgotten archive wasn't just nostalgia. It was a repository of sensitive data. I looked at the clock. 30 seconds. Methuselah would begin shutting down. I couldn't let Protocol C die in an automatic power-off. If the system cut power while the encryption layer was active, the directory could corrupt, and I could lose everything. I had to buy time. I reopened the terminal and typed the emergency command to extend runtime by 1 hour. It went against my orders, against everything I'd planned, but adrenaline was driving my fingers. The system accepted it. Methuselah got a reprieve. What does posting the cork mean? I typed, returning to the comment thread. The answer. The cork isn't an object. It's a code. Inside the blue bottle photo, in the metadata layer, there's a field you never used, light source. You need to change its value to cyanide. That's the password for Protocol C. You have to open Protocol C and post the first file. Now, I read the word cyanide. Poisonous. I didn't hesitate. The urgency was palpable, and the knowledge of the archive's internal architecture was too precise to deny. I opened the image editor. I had to move. I loaded the blue bottle photo again. I didn't touch the visuals. I went straight to the metadata editor, the hidden information box most people ignore. There it was, light source. Empty as always. I took a breath and typed it, letter by letter. Cyanide. I saved the image. Methuselah made a grinding sound, like old gears turning, like it was waking up for real for the first time in years. I went back to the terminal and ran the command to unlock Protocol C's encrypted directory using the new light source value as the key. Access granted. The terminal filled with file names I hadn't seen in over a decade. Coded names, but faintly familiar. Shadow Project, Zero Report, The Bridge. The first file listed was the oldest, dated to the year the archive was founded. Its name was the Venice document. The ghost in the comments sent one last instruction. Post the Venice document as the new final post. Use the blue bottle as the image, but the text must be the document, entirely. They're watching the archive. If you post the blue bottle with the password, they'll know the vault is open. They'll come. But if you post the document, they'll know the message has been delivered. Hurry, Ethan. Time's up. I knew I was doing the right thing, even if I didn't understand the risk. Protocol C was the archive's true purpose, and now I had a chance to release it, even in my final act. I opened the Venice document. It was a plain text file, no formatting, but the content was explosive. Transcripts of conversations between high-level telecom executives, dated to the late 1990s, where they openly discussed creating memory filters to shape public perception of recent history. Proof that the internet, from the beginning, was never truly free. I copied the entire text. It was long, very long. I returned to the archive interface. I created a new post, the real final post. I attached the blue bottle with the metadata set to cyanide. Then I pasted the full Venice document, more than 10,000 characters, into the body. No introduction. Just raw text. Let it speak for itself. My hand trembled when I clicked publish. This time, the progress bar took much longer. The Venice document was heavy. While Methuselah churned, I glanced at the comment thread. It was gone. The post went live. The Venice document was now visible to the world, beneath the image of the blue bottle. I was about to shut the system down, like we'd agreed, now that the secret mission was complete. But before I could even touch the terminal, my office door, steel with a heavy deadbolt, was breached. Not with an explosion, but with a dry, metallic snap, like someone had cut the lock with surgical precision. Harsh hallway light flooded my little basement room. I spun in my chair, half blinded by the glare. 3 figures stood in the doorway. Men in dark suits, no visible badges, but with the posture of people used to giving orders. They didn't look like police. They didn't look like security. They looked like erasers. The man in the middle was tall, his face carved from something that could have been stone. He looked from me to the monitor, where the Venice document glowed. He spoke calmly, yet his voice cut the air. Ethan, the curator, you've just made a very expensive mistake. He stepped forward, and I understood there was nowhere left to run. The archive had spoken, and now they were here to silence it. I dug up the message, and now I was part of it. Protocol C was free. But I was trapped. Where's the cork? He asked. I looked at the monitor. The Venice document had just received a new interaction. It was a red icon, flashing furiously. I smiled despite the fear. The cork, I said, looking at the man in the suit, is floating around out there. The phrase, the cork is floating, was my crooked little grin. And his expression vanished. The man who, a second ago, looked like a polite encyclopedia salesman went rigid. His eyes, gray and empty, caught a spark. "You don't understand, curator," he said, and his voice was no longer smooth. It was rough, like sandpaper. "The Venice document has to be contained. It's a protocol breach. It exposes the foundation." I didn't take my eyes off the screen. The red icon pulsed. This wasn't a system error. It was a coordinated strike. They were trying to nullify the proof. "I understand perfectly," I replied, forcing my voice to stay even while my heart hammered in my throat. "I understand you've been trying to bury history. And I've spent 20 years digging it back up, pixel by pixel. The Venice document isn't a breach, mate. It's the truth, stripped bare." I leaned over the desk, shielding the keyboard. I needed seconds. "See what's flashing there?" I pointed without touching the screen. "That's the master suppression attempt indicator. They're trying to delete the root record, the original ledger of everything that was done and undone, everything that was said and silenced. They think memory is just a file you can drag to the bin." He stepped closer. I caught the sharp scent of lavender and freshly pressed fabric, clashing with the grime of my office. "Don't be sentimental, curator. It's only information. And information can be rewritten to optimize social stability. It's for everyone's good." "For whose good?" I let out a dry, bitter laugh. "For whoever holds the brush that paints the past. I don't work for stability. I work for permanence." I needed to explain it, to him, to myself, what was at stake. The Venice document wasn't a neat PDF. It was an inventory. Imagine a library that doesn't just keep books, but keeps the record that those books existed, who burned them, and who rewrote them. For decades, the people he represented, something like a foundation for stability, had scrubbed the internet. They erased traces of monumental failures, historic injustices, anything that might make people doubt the official story. Smooth, perfect, and completely false. My job, as curator of the old net, was to find the fragments that fell through the cracks. The vanished blog post from 2005. The tweet deleted 10 minutes after it was posted. The photo of a meeting that was never meant to exist. I cataloged them and stitched them together. The Venice document was the needle and thread. That red icon meant they'd found the primary hiding place, the last master copy I kept physically isolated, and they were using a high-level suppression protocol to crush it. "You have 30 seconds to give me the access code, curator," the man said, raising his hand. In his palm was a small device, black, buttonless, smooth as a river stone. I knew what it was. A portable electromagnetic field killer. If he triggered it, everything in my office would become worthless scrap, and the document would vanish before I could react. I met his eyes. 30 seconds. "I'm not giving you the code," I said. Under the desk, my finger was already resting on my phone, set to a special mode, waiting for one touch. "It's a waste of potential," he murmured, almost sadly. "So much devotion to digital rubbish. You could be cataloging the new history. The clean version." "Clean history is washed history," I snapped. "And washed history always smells like a lie." I couldn't fight him physically. He was bigger, trained. I had to use the only weapon left to me. Network speed. 20 seconds. I pressed the button on my phone. Not to call the police, who, honestly, probably worked for him. It was the contingency trigger. The Venice document wasn't only on my computer. It had been split into thousands of pieces, seeded across mirror servers I'd hidden beneath the modern web, forgotten places, old architecture, the kind they assumed had been decommissioned. The button did two things at once. First, it launched the final upload, my real last post. Second, it triggered the building's fire alarm. The noise was deafening, a screaming wail that tore through the air. The man in the suit blinked, startled. That wasn't how curators behaved. Curators were quiet, methodical. They didn't make noise. "You," he started, but the alarm had already done its job. I threw myself sideways, knocking over my chair and a small side table. I needed chaos. And the alarm had a secondary effect. It triggered the museum's old suppression system. Not water, an inert gas mist designed to protect paper artifacts. But it was thick. The room filled with cold white fog. The man hesitated. He couldn't trigger the field killer blindly in the fog, not without risking his own equipment, and the thing he'd come for, the code. "You've made a mistake, curator," he shouted, his voice muffled by the alarm and mist. "The mistake was coming here." I shouted back, crawling for the doorway. My phone buzzed in my hand. The upload was starting. The Venice document, massive, was being sliced and sent. This was the most dangerous moment. The moment the cork was truly coming out of the bottle. I crawled out of my office and into the museum corridor. The fog spread behind me, and I heard heavy footsteps, close. He was coming. He wasn't going to let me go. Running through an old, dusty museum in the dark, with a shrieking alarm, is surreal. I knew the corridors, I'd lived in them, but fear made my legs clumsy. I took the service stairs 2 at a time. I heard the echo of pursuit. He was fast. But my mind was locked onto one thing. My phone. I had to make sure the post finished. The last post wasn't a goodbye note. It was the master link. It was the key that released the Venice document to the world. Not on the internet we know now, the controlled one. I was using the Ghost Net, a decentralized communications architecture old geeks built in the 90s, never truly shut down, only forgotten. I burst out into the street, stumbling. The night air was cold and damp. The alarm still screamed inside the museum. I slipped into the shadows of a narrow side alley. I stopped, gasping for air, and checked my phone. Upload progress, 48%. Halfway. I had to get out of there. He would be out of the museum any second now. I started walking fast, blending into the crowd spilling out of nearby bars and restaurants. I must have looked unhinged, sweaty, reeking of mold and inert gas. As I walked, the phone vibrated again. This time, it wasn't the upload. It was a message. From the Foundation for Stability. I stopped beneath a weak street lamp and read it. The language was cold, corporate, but the threat was unmistakable. Curator, your interference is causing unacceptable instability. Primary containment protocol has failed. We are activating shadow protocol. If the document is released, consequences will be irreversible for your existence and for public trust in the established historical narrative. They weren't negotiating anymore. They were hunting me with everything they had. Shadow protocol. I knew exactly what that meant. It wasn't just erasing the file. It was erasing me. Not necessarily killing me, but discrediting me, nullifying me, rewriting my entire digital footprint until everything I'd ever said or done looked like the delusion of a paranoid nobody. They would rewrite my biography out of existence. I kept walking, scanning my surroundings. I needed a safe place to finish the upload. I ducked into a 24-hour cafe. The smell of stale coffee and fryer grease was oddly comforting. I ordered a water and sat in the darkest corner, my back against the wall. 65%. I was racing both time and the most powerful lie manufacturing machine on the planet. As I waited, I thought about how this had all begun, not with heroism, with patience. For years, I'd been the guy who kept the junk. The curator. No one valued what I did. While everyone chased the next new thing, I was digging through dead archives. Rusted hard drives, obsolete magnetic tapes no one could read anymore. I remembered the first fragment of what would become the Venice document. It was buried inside an abandoned 1990s video game. Encrypted code that looked like garbage. But when I cracked it, it turned out to be part of a company logbook from an organization that officially had never existed. That's when I understood. They didn't delete everything. They buried it. They layered truth under mountains of digital trash, trusting time to do the rest. The Venice document was proof that the history we'd been given was a quilt of omissions. And if that proof got out, the credibility of governments, corporations, and institutions built on that lie would collapse. Chaos, yes. But honest chaos. 78%. Almost there. I glanced at the cafe door, paranoia creeping in. Every person who walked in looked like a Foundation agent. I pulled my laptop from my backpack and tethered it to my phone. I needed more processing power to push the final 22%. The laptop was old, but heavily modified. It ran an operating system only I understood, built to navigate the ghost net. As I typed the final commands, the cafe door opened again. He was there. Not the man in the suit, but someone similar. Younger. Designer hoodie. Focused eyes. A digital hunter. He didn't spot me right away. He was staring at his phone, probably tracking the signal spike from my upload. I had to move. I closed the laptop softly, letting the phone handle transmission alone. 85%. I stood up slowly, pretending to head for the restroom, and slipped out of his line of sight. The bathroom was tiny and filthy. I locked the door. I couldn't wait. It had to go now. I opened an encrypted voice channel on my phone, my private network. The handful of silent curators I knew were still out there, working in the dark. "The curator is online," I whispered. "Document at 90%. Shadow protocol active. Prepare to receive the key." Confirmation came almost instantly, a soft click. I didn't know exactly who was on the other end, but I knew they were ready. The moment the document dropped, they'd replicate it, scatter it across the ghost net, make it impossible to erase. 95%. The young man in the cafe was getting restless. I heard a chair scrape. He was moving. I took a deep breath. This was it. "Go," I whispered, triggering the force transmission command. The phone vibrated violently, like it might explode in my hand. 100%. It was done. The last post wasn't a farewell, it was the key. The cork wasn't floating anymore. It had been thrown into the sea. Relief hit me first, then terror. I had just declared war on the people who curated reality itself. The bathroom door shook under a heavy. "Curator, I know you're in there. Hand over the device and we can negotiate your rehabilitation." The young man's voice was sharp, full of manufactured authority. I smiled. Rehabilitation. They thought I was doing this for money. Or fame. I dropped the phone into the toilet and flushed. I wasn't giving them the pleasure of tracking it. I looked at my reflection in the cracked mirror. I looked 10 years older than when I'd walked into the museum. The pounding on the door intensified. "We're breaching." 5 seconds. I didn't answer. I'd done what mattered. The document was free. I climbed out through the small ventilation window into a trash-filled alley. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. I hit the ground hard, adrenaline flooding my system. I was free. For now. But I knew the chase was just beginning. I started running again, this time not just from the man in the suit or the hunter in the cafe, but from the consequences of my own act. As I ran through the early morning streets, my pocket buzzed. My second phone, a disposable burner I kept only for network confirmation. An encrypted message. Document received. Dispersion initiated. The truth is in the air. I stopped in the middle of the empty street and looked up at the dark sky. The game had changed. I wasn't a hidden curator anymore. I was a catalyst. But there was a second line, and it made my blood run cold. The Foundation is counterattacking. Not online, but in reality. They are rewriting you. Find the blind zone. Rewriting me in reality. I knew what that meant. Shadow protocol wasn't just digital erasure. It was physical annulment. I had to disappear, not just from sight, but from records. I had to reach the blind zone, a place the Foundation had deliberately failed to map, a pocket of the world outside their data control. The effects started immediately. I tried to pay for a taxi with my credit card. Declined that I tried calling an old friend. Number does not exist. I searched my own name on the burner phone. Nothing. I was being erased in real time. I was no longer the curator. I was a ghost. I walked to the nearest train station, avoiding security cameras. I needed cash. I had a small emergency stash hidden inside an abandoned mailbox. When I got there, the mailbox was open. Empty. They were fast. They weren't chasing me. They were erasing the trails that led me back to myself. I felt exposed. Without an identity. I went into the station, desperate. I needed a ticket heading south, toward the rural area where the legendary blind zone was located. I approached the ticket counter and spoke to the clerk. "Please, I need a ticket to Riverton." The woman looked at me, confused. "Riverton? "Sir, there haven't been trains to Riverton for over 20 years. That line was decommissioned." I froze. The line had not been decommissioned. I had used it last year. "No, I know there is. Line 42, the old freight line." She rolled her eyes as if I were drunk. "Sir, please. If you're not buying a ticket, step aside. There is no line 42. You must be mistaken." The Foundation was acting. They hadn't just erased my money and my contacts, they were rewriting the infrastructure of the reality I knew. If the train line no longer existed for the rest of the world, how was I supposed to reach the blind zone? I stepped away from the counter, panic rising in my throat. I needed to think. I needed a backup plan. I couldn't trust anything connected to the network. No GPS. No digital maps. No public records. I sat on a cold metal bench and closed my eyes. I had the key. The document was out there. But I was now the primary target, and they had full editorial control over reality. I had to use what the Foundation couldn't erase: human memory and forgotten physical architecture. I remembered an old map I had catalogued years earlier, a map of escape routes from the old net's power grid. Those routes led to places the Foundation considered too irrelevant to monitor. I stood up. I couldn't be the curator anymore, the man who lived under the glow of monitors. I had to become a drifter, a real ghost. I would reach the blind zone on foot, using routes that existed only in the physical memory of the world. I started walking east, toward the edge of the city, where streets were less monitored and the internet was weaker. I needed temporary shelter to understand the extent of the damage. As I walked, the night began to fade. The sun was rising, and I looked back at the city I had just saved, or condemned. I passed a newsstand. I stopped. I couldn't resist. I saw the main headline, printed in fresh ink. "Major fire at Digital History Museum. Curator disappears. Fraud and embezzlement suspected." My chest tightened. They had already rewritten the event. I wasn't the man who released the truth. I was the criminal who caused a fire and ran off with the money. The photo on the front page wasn't mine. It was a man who vaguely resembled me, but with different glasses and a more sinister expression. They had created a new me for the story, the curator who fled. I looked at the photo and felt real pain. They were stealing not only my life, but my reputation, my legacy. But there was a small note at the bottom of the page, almost hidden. It mentioned a strange global communications failure, causing spikes of network instability. The cork had come loose. The document was doing its work. I bought the newspaper with the last coins I had and kept walking. I needed somewhere to hide. I remembered an old abandoned rail depot, a place the Foundation considered useless and therefore never bothered to map digitally. When I arrived, the depot was a labyrinth of rusted metal and shadows. For the first time, I felt briefly safe. I sat inside an abandoned rail car and opened the newspaper. I needed more information about Shadow Protocol. I knew it would erase me completely if I stayed within reach of the main network. I needed a zone of electromagnetic silence. I used the newspaper to cover myself, trying to get some sleep. Sleep didn't come. I was on full alert. I was the last guardian of a history the world didn't know it had lost. And now I was the fugitive. The final post had been sent. Now I had to survive what came next. The digital battle was over. The real war in the physical world, against a Foundation that could erase train lines and rewrite headlines, was just beginning. I looked east. The blind zone was hundreds of miles away. I had to reach it before they turned me into a forgotten footnote, before my false self, the criminal, became the only version left in official history. I closed my eyes and whispered into the silence of the depot, "The cork is in the ocean, Foundation. Now brace for the tide." And I prepared for the journey. I stared at the screen, the cursor blinking, and the weight of everything I had created seemed to collapse onto my shoulders. The world outside was on fire, virtually speaking. I could feel the heat of anxiety from millions of people waiting, arguing, speculating. The vortex had become a monster I had fed myself, and now I had to serve the final course. I took a deep breath. The air felt heavy and dusty in my small office. My hands trembled, Not from fear, but from exhaustion and a strange sense of peace that comes with certainty. I started typing. It wasn't long or filled with elaborate metaphors. It was direct, honest, and came from deep inside, the place the curator persona always tried to hide. I wrote about the need to stop, about how beauty, when turned into daily obligation, becomes a cage. I explained that I had started curating other people's lives because I didn't know how to heal my own, and that, in the end, the only way to save the person behind the screen was to turn the screen off forever. I didn't use the word goodbye. I used the word thank you. I ended with a simple sentence I had always wanted to write, but that felt too vulnerable for the curator. Find your own light. I need to find mine. My finger hovered over the publish button. It was the point of no return. The death of a legend and the birth of an anonymous man. I clicked. And then came the strangest feeling I have ever experienced, a mixture of fear and freedom. For the first 5 seconds, there was absolute silence. Not the silence of my room, but the silence of the network. It was as if the entire planet had held its breath. I could almost hear the internet reading. Traffic exploded in a way I had never seen. Messages flooded the screen. Comments poured in endlessly. It wasn't the old vortex, angry and demanding. This was raw emotion, shock, grief, despair, and, unexpectedly, understanding. I didn't read any of it. I couldn't. If I stopped to absorb that wave, I would be pulled back in. The temptation to reply, to explain, to see who understood, was overwhelming. But I had made a promise to myself. I closed the browser. Not minimized. Not saved. The computer sat there, humming, its warmth the only trace of the storm I had just unleashed. I stood up from the chair, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of expectation. It was time to close the shop. I looked around my office, the bunker where the curator had lived. There were stacks of books, notebooks, and artifacts. Do you remember those mysterious letters, those small boxes I used to receive, always with no return address, filled with objects that felt like echoes of past lives? I had kept them all. In a way, they were the fuel for my inspiration, proof that memory lived in physical objects, not just in bytes. I went to the drawer and took out the last box that had arrived, the one sealed with red wax, the one I had promised myself I would only open after the final post. The wax was cold and brittle. I broke it carefully. Inside, there was no antique object, no faded photograph. There was only one thing, a small hand mirror with a worn metal frame. I hesitated. Why a mirror? I picked it up and looked at the reflection. It wasn't the curator staring back at me. It was just me, tired, but with something new in my eyes. Then I noticed the words engraved on the back of the frame, in tiny letters. You were there all along. In that moment, I understood the true meaning of the artifacts. They weren't memories of strangers. They were reminders that real life, the person I was, existed outside the screen. The mirror was the final push. They were telling me, stop searching for beauty in other people's lives and look at your own reflection. Who were they? I never knew. Maybe it was a small group of early, attentive followers. Maybe it was just one very perceptive person. It didn't matter. They had helped me find the exit. I grabbed an old backpack. I put the mirror inside along with my keys, my wallet, and my phone. The phone. I didn't throw it away. I did something more final. I deleted all my accounts. I removed every social media app. I uninstalled everything that tied me to the curator. And finally, I changed my number. I left the computer on. I left the digital chaos roaring by itself. It didn't need me anymore. It had itself to consume. And I walked out. I closed the door to my apartment for the last time. Afternoon sunlight spilled across the street. Normal light, unfiltered, unedited. Just light. I didn't have a grand plan. I hadn't bought a one-way ticket to some remote island. I just started walking. The first week was strange. It felt like I'd lost a limb. Every 5 minutes, I reached for my phone, expecting a notification, a message, praise, criticism. But there was nothing. The silence was deafening, but it was a healing silence. I started seeing things again, without the curator's lens. I saw an elderly couple laughing in a park, and the beauty wasn't in how I would describe the scene in a post, but in the sound of their laughter. I ate fresh bread, and the taste was just the taste. No need for a metaphor about the fleeting nature of life. I was learning how to be ordinary again, and being ordinary was liberating. Some of you might be wondering, what about the legacy? What did the curator leave behind? Well, the internet is stubborn. The final post stayed there, pinned to the top of the page. And the vortex, after exhausting its tears and anger, began to turn into something else. The most dedicated followers did exactly what I had asked. They began curating each other. They created their own spaces, inspired by my work but shaped by their own voices. Small curators scattered across the world, keeping the flame alive, without the pressure of a single temple. And me? I moved to a small coastal town. I found a simple job, one that required my hands, not my intellect. I work in an old library, in the archives section. Ironic, isn't it? The curator, now a quiet archivist. My work is to catalog, organize, and restore forgotten documents and books. It's patient work, respectful of history that has already been told. There are no likes, no comments, just the smell of old paper and the dust of time. One day, months after I disappeared, a coworker, a young, quiet guy, approached me in the break room. His face was flushed, his phone in his hand. "You won't believe this, John," he said. Yes, John, my real name, the one I could finally use without fear. "Look at this. This page, the curator, do you know it? He posted something months ago, and people still won't stop talking about it." My heart skipped. I had never mentioned the curator to anyone. I couldn't. I looked at his phone. It was my final post. The profile picture. The typography I had chosen so carefully. "Is it popular?" I asked, pretending curiosity. He shook his head, impressed. "Popular doesn't even cover it. It's like a myth. Nobody knows who the guy is, but his posts, man, they hit right where it hurts. Especially the last one. He says we need to live real life, not just the edited version." Then he added, "I keep wondering, who was he? Why did he disappear? The guy had the world in his hands." I wrapped my fingers around my coffee mug, feeling its warmth. I looked at that young face, full of searching and admiration. "Sometimes," I said calmly, "people need to disappear in order to find themselves." He didn't have the world in his hands, my friend. He had himself in his hands. And he chose to let go. The young man thought for a moment. "That's a shame. I really wish he'd come back." I smiled. A genuine smile the curator would never have allowed himself. "Maybe he never left," I replied. "Maybe he just changed addresses. And now he's just watching. Seeing people find their own light, like he asked." I said nothing more. He put his phone away and we went back to work. I kept archiving, brushing dust from a manuscript dated 1920. I was John, the archivist. I was anonymous. I was free. But sometimes, when I'm walking down the street and see light hit just the right way, or hear a stranger telling a story on the bus, I feel that old itch in my fingertips. The urge to catalog, to name, to preserve. And I stop. I breathe. The curator is still here, somewhere in my memory, reminding me of the beauty in the world. But he's no longer in charge. He's just a quiet voice, a whisper, telling me to live the moment, without needing to post it. I'm no longer the guardian of the world's memories. I am, finally, the guardian of my own life. And that, my friends, is the most beautiful post I've ever made. That's why, standing here now, telling you this story, I know I made the right choice. I closed the circle. The legend is yours now. The life is mine. Thank you for listening until the end. The curtain falls. And life goes on, unfiltered, unedited, and beautiful that way.